And our foreign affairs reporter Stephen Dziedzic has been trawling through the budget papers, and he joins me now from Parliament House. Stephen, good evening. Now, what are the numbers telling us in terms of the federal government's commitment to overseas development assistance, particularly in Asia and the Pacific?
Well, Girish, $5.097 billion. That's the magic number. That's what will be spent in the coming financial year on official development assistance. Now, that's a modest increase of around $135 million for what it was for this financial year. But I don't think many people will get hugely excited by that modest increase. After all, it barely keeps pace with inflation. And if you look at this as a percentage of the whole budget, it's actually only 0.18% of gross national income. So that's actually the lowest it's been for quite some time. So the overall picture is really one of a budget that's effectively flatlining, or over the long term, perhaps even going backwards if you look at it after inflation. Now, that doesn't mean that people in the aid sector will necessarily be horrified by this. After all, just holding the line steady is no small thing when you've got things like the Trump administration slashing development spending and also major cuts being made by countries like the United Kingdom and a number of countries in Europe. In that context, Australia holding things steady is no bad thing in the eyes of the sector. But I think it's still going to be seen as inadequate in the eyes of some, particularly those who say to meet the scale of the global challenges in our region alone, Australia really does need to be substantially boosting aid budgets to a point where it's much higher than it is now, perhaps around 1% of the whole budget.
Yes, and who might be in this current budget the biggest winners and losers as far as aid recipients are concerned?
Yeah, it's worth digging into this, Girish, because beyond the headline figures, there is a bit of an interesting story to tell here. Now, what the government's doing in this budget coming up is it's actually taking money away from multilateral institutions and repurposing it or redirecting it to this region. And that's done in particular on those countries, or with an eye on those countries and programs that might be vulnerable to those sweeping US aid cuts that we've seen over the last few weeks. So it's around $120 million which is being redirected or perhaps delayed in some instances from multilateral funds and plunged into things like HIV and health programs in the Pacific, climate programs across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, work that's being done to bolster the work that's been done by health professionals in the region, that sort of thing. So the shift here is twofold. On the one hand, you're going to see an ever greater proportion of the Australian aid budget spent in this region. About 75% of the whole budget is now being spent in the Indo-Pacific. And on top of that, a shift away, at least for the moment, from multilateral institutions and towards bilateral aid programs that are largely run by Australia or by contractors and partners that are taking money directly from the Australian government. This is Australia really trying to ensure that it's doing all it can to protect its region from the impact of the Trump cuts, but also trying to protect its own interests and its own equities in this region in an increasingly uncertain and volatile global environment, with aid retrenchment really at the fore, particularly from the US.
And Stephen, speaking of the volatile, the Trump administration, it's been casting a shadow of sorts over this year's budget. So how has it influenced outcomes?
I mean, the most obvious way we've seen this influence, I think, is in the way that it is shaping the aid budget. But it's not just the aid budget. There's also the broader economic uncertainty that this government's grappling with at the moment. The real fear in that instance is not so much the direct tariffs that the US might impose on Australia, although those anxieties and fears are very real and very tangible, but more the prospect of the Trump administration really sparking a global economic conflagration, perhaps a global recession or even depression as a result of spiralling trade conflicts with other countries. If that happens, obviously, Australia, as a highly trade exposed and trade dependent nation, could be in a great deal of trouble. So the anxieties are less about what Trump might do to Australia through tariffs, although that is real, but more what that uncertainty uncertainty means for Australia and its economy going forward. And that's why you have the Treasurer repeatedly talking about the global economic outlook, the uncertainty it creates, and the impact that that has on Australia's bottom line out into the future.
Okay, Stephen Dziedzic in Canberra, thank you so much.
Thanks, Girish. Appreciate it.